Hello and welcome. The top executive from Chinese technology giant Huawei, who was arrested in Canada more than a week ago, has been asked for granted bail. Meng Wanzhou was detained at the request of the United States over accusations she violated sanctions on Iran. Since then, the implications of her arrest have ricocheted around the world and called into question efforts to end the trade war between China and the United States. James Ransley has more.
It's thought that telecom giant Huawei's chief financial officer, Meng Wanzhou, is being held here in this Canadian prison while she waits to find out if she's been granted bail. China's foreign ministry has summoned the US ambassador in Beijing, demanding details of the detention and insisting that America withdraw Ms. Meng's arrest warrant. The arrest happened as US President Donald Trump and China's leader Xi Jinping attempted to de-escalate a bitter trade war at the G20 summit last week. America's trade representative insists that Ms. Meng's arrest won't have much of an impact on talks.
It is totally separate from anything that I work on or anything that the trade policy people in the administration work on. So for us, it's unrelated. It's criminal justice.
The Huawei executive is accused of violating US sanctions by selling telecom equipment to Iran. She was taken into custody last week in Vancouver while changing planes. China's state media called the arrest a targeted attack against China's leading technology companies, and Canada's role as a participating wrecker is becoming more and more obvious. According to court documents, Ms. Meng has long-standing ties to Vancouver dating back at least 15 years, as well as significant property holdings in the city. Her family also sought leave to remain in Vancouver if she was granted bail, with her husband saying he plans to bring the couple's daughter to Vancouver to attend school during the trial. Meng Wanzhou's court hearing is due to resume on Monday. James Ransley, BBC News.
A crucial parliamentary vote over the deal for Britain's exit from the European Union will go ahead this week. That's according to the Brexit Secretary Stephen Barclay. He said it was the only way to deliver what people had voted for. But there have been predictions of a heavy defeat for the government. Here's our political correspondent Ian Watson.
Is she seeking divine intervention? Theresa May attended church in her constituency this morning. She's weathered many political storms, but she's still having to fight for her deal and for her job. Some ministers think the outlook is so bleak she should postpone this week's crucial Commons vote. But the Brexit Secretary said it won't be called off.
The vote is going ahead, and that's because it is a good deal. It's the only deal. And it's important that we don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. We move into uncharted waters. Yes, the Prime Minister is fighting for us and will continue in post. But the question for...
Can she stay on as Prime Minister?
Yes,
if
absolutely.
She can stay on as Prime Minister.
Absolutely.
Even if she loses the vote big.
Yes, absolutely.
The Brexit Secretary voted to leave the EU, but his better-known colleague was the face of the campaign. Boris Johnson was asked in Parliament this week what his big idea was now. Well, today he revealed it. Hold back some of the divorce bill until we get a better deal.
Unless they help us, then there is a risk of no deal. And to incentivise them further, we should say that we will delay the payment of at least half the 39. Can I just finish this? At least half the 39 billion until they've done a free trade deal by the end of 2020. And that is the way to, I think, to put a bit of a tiger in the tank.
So if he doesn't like Theresa May's deal, would he like to replace her as Conservative leader?
I will give you an absolute categorical promise that I will continue to advocate what I think is the most sensible,
I'm asking you to promise that you're not going to stand against her, because you are going to stand against her.
I'm going to offer you the most sensible plan to get out of this mess.
The People's Vote campaign believes the final say on Brexit shouldn't be left to politicians at all. And at a rally in East London, this Labour shadow minister declared her support for a new referendum and wanted her party leadership to do the same.
The promises made in 2016 are so far removed from the reality of the 585-page withdrawal agreement that it's time to take the Brexit decision back to the people.
The Cabinet Minister, Amber Rudd, has talked about the possibility of another referendum if Theresa May's deal falls. And another government minister today says it looks increasingly likely, but MPs have to vote for it. And the attitude of Labour's leadership could be crucial, but they seem to be in no hurry to commit.
We would push for a general election, and that we believe to be our absolute priority. All other options should be on the table, including the possibility of a popular vote, a referendum, later down the line.
Many MPs are raining on the Prime Minister's parade, uniting against her deal, but deciding on an alternative is more complex.
Well, Ian gave us this further update a little earlier.
Theresa May is staring defeat in the face, but Downing Street is insisting that Tuesday's vote will indeed go ahead. But I have to tell you that very senior figures, even at this late stage, are still pressing for a postponement. What she intends to do is speak to some of her MPs who still have very serious doubts about the arrangements for avoiding a hard border in Ireland, the so-called backstop. She spoke to her Irish counterpart, Leo Varadkar. Now, Downing Street know if she can allay those concerns, the rebellion will diminish significantly, but it's still difficult to see what of substance she can offer that can really make a difference. Interestingly, tonight, another development: Jeremy Corbyn, the Labour leader, under a bit of pressure. Prominent leaders from socialist parties across Europe have delivered him this letter, calling on him explicitly to back a new referendum, or what they call a people's voice, before Britain leaves the European Union. Now, Theresa May said if she loses this crucial vote here at Westminster on Tuesday, we're in uncharted waters. And I think she's right in this respect. The only certainty here at Westminster is uncertainty.
Let's get some of the day's other news now. Initial results from the snap general election in Armenia suggest that the party of the acting Prime Minister, Nikol Pashinyan, has a clear lead. It's won at least 60% of the votes counted so far. Mr. Pashinyan came to power in the South Caucasus country in a peaceful revolution earlier this year. Two sides in Yemen's war have held their first round of talks in Sweden. Discussions were between the Yemeni government and Houthi rebel representatives. They focused on a potential prisoner swap, allowing humanitarian aid and stopping the violence in the main port of Hodeidah. And the deadline for detaining the former Nissan chairman Carlos Ghosn runs out shortly. He's being held as part of an investigation into suspected financial misconduct. Mr. Ghosn was arrested in Japan last month and has been detained since then. He's accused of underreporting his earnings for several years. The Nissan board sacked him in November, but he remains chairman and chief executive of Renault. Saudi Arabia says it will not extradite the two key suspects in the murder of the journalist Jamal Khashoggi to Turkey. Last week, a Turkish court issued arrest warrants for Ahmed al-Asiri, a senior intelligence official, and former royal advisor Saud al-Qahtani, saying they didn't believe the Saudi authorities would take formal action against them. Mr. Khashoggi was killed in the Saudi consulate in Istanbul in October. Hundreds of homes in the southeast of the United States are without power after a weekend of heavy snowfall. A state of emergency has been declared in North Carolina and Virginia, parts of which reported nearly half a metre of snow. Heavy snowfall caused problems for motorists and led to the cancellation of over 1,500 flights. A 26-year-old man has appeared in court in New Zealand charged with the murder of the British backpacker Grace Millane, who went missing 9 days ago. The man can't be named for legal reasons. Ms. Millane, who was 22 and from Essex, had been travelling around the world after graduating from university. Our correspondent Phil Mercer joins us from Sydney. Phil, what happened in court?
Well, Judge Evangelos Thomas told members of Grace Millane's family who were in court that he understood that their grief must be desperate. The judge also saying that justice for Grace, he hoped, would be swift and fair. This 26-year-old man who has been charged with her murder, he was dressed in a blue boiler suit when he made his appearance. He didn't enter a plea, he didn't say anything, nodding only occasionally to the judge during this very brief hearing. He'll be remanded in custody and is due back in court towards the end of January. Now, the judge in this case had offered to lift the suppression order on this suspect's identity, but the man's lawyer has made an appeal, so for legal reasons we can't report his name.
The investigation in the case is obviously ongoing. Have we heard any more about that?
Well, over the weekend, the police searched a bit of bushland about 25 kilometres from the centre of Auckland where a body was found. The police say that their search for Grace is over. There will be a formal identification process through a post-mortem. And the police are at pains to point out that the investigation is continuing. A lot of work still needs to be done. And of course, fundamental questions need to be addressed. How and why did this young British woman die disguise. She'd been in New Zealand travelling alone for about a fortnight following a group tour in South America. This was supposed to have been the adventure of a lifetime, but tragically for Grace Millane's family from England, it has ended in the most horrible of circumstances.
In the New Zealand court system, is it unusual for an accused to have the name to be suppressed?
It does happen, and what we've had now is that the judge was willing to lift the suppression order on the suspect's identity. The lawyer said that he would make an appeal to ensure that his client's identity remained a secret. So for the next 20 days, that suppression order will be in place. Up until that time, it is against New Zealand law to report the identity of this man. We do understand that he was living in the Auckland hotel where Grace Millane was last seen at the start of December, and she was missing for about 9 days before a body was found in hills to the west of Auckland. And as we say, this is a police investigation that is continuing.
All right, Phil Mercer in Sydney, thank you very much for that update. The French President Emmanuel Macron will address the nation later as he tries to bring 4 weeks of violent anti-government protests to an end. France has now had 4 weekends of demonstrations against fuel tax rises, high living costs and other issues. About 125,000 protesters were on the streets on Saturday, with more than 1,700 arrested. Lucy Williamson is in Paris.
President Macron is facing a couple of problems tonight. One is that if he tackled these protests a few weeks ago, he might have got away with simply cancelling the rise in fuel taxes. The trouble is, since then, the movement has grown, and with it, the movement's demands. And the second problem he faces is that it's also a very diverse movement. People have joined it, bringing all kinds of grievances. So satisfying all of them is going to be quite difficult. And the government spokesman today said he thought it might be an almost made-to-measure solution. So President Macron's speech tomorrow is going to have to do quite a lot of things. And I think first and foremost, he's going to want to convince people that he's really listening, that France's democratically elected leaders feel responsible to those who are struggling and really hear what they're trying to say. And that is probably going to mean some more financial concessions, whether that's bonuses for low-paid workers or lifting some taxes. The real problem he's got is trying to do all of that whilst not looking weak and not rowing back on the reform programme he came to power to deliver.
Lucy Williamson will do stay with us on BBC News still to come. Putting the entire history of life on Earth online. Scientists plan to digitise millions of fossils hidden away in drawers for years.
John Lennon was shot at the entrance to the Dakota building in the center of New York. There's been a crowd here standing in more or less silent vigil, and the flowers have been piling up.
The 14th ceasefire of this war ended at the walls of the old city of Dubrovnik. This morning, witnesses said shells were landing every 20 seconds.
People are celebrating the passing of a man they hold responsible for hundreds of deaths and oppression. Elsewhere, people have been gathering to mourn his passing.
Imelda Marcos, the widow of the former president of the Philippines, has gone on trial in Manila. She's facing 7 charges of tax evasion. She pleaded not guilty.
The Prince and Princess of Wales are to separate. A statement from Buckingham Palace said the decision had been reached amicably.
This is BBC News, the latest headlines. In her request for bail, the Huawei executive detained in Canada has said she's innocent of fraud charges and unwell and won't flee the country if freed. The British government is continuing to insist that a parliamentary vote on its Brexit deal will go ahead despite significant opposition from MPs. Well, when Donald Trump entered the White House just under 2 years ago, the number of illegal immigrants living in America was at its lowest level for almost a decade. More and more people were using legal means to enter the country. But the president's attempts to restrict legal migration may now be forcing others to sneak into the country. Recently, thousands of Central Americans fleeing violence and poverty started their journey to the U.S. from the town of Tapachula, southern Mexico, traveling more than 2,000 miles to the town of Tijuana on the border with the U.S. Well, they're now camped out there, frustrated by tough new restrictions on asylum and willing to do anything to live in America. James Cook reports.
Charlotte is 3 years old. She's travelled 3,000 miles from Honduras, and the next few steps will shape her entire life. Her mother is risking all to search for the promised land.
Todo sacrificio valdrá la pena.
God willing, all the sacrifice will be worth it, she says. For a toddler, the scramble under the border must be terrifying. And for Charlotte's grandmother, it's almost too much. Now, the law says, this American agent must assess whether the family has credible fear of persecution or torture, and if so, let them in to consider a claim for asylum. At this border, powerful forces collide. It's here that the poverty of developing nations clashes with the wealth of the United States. And it's here too that the hopes of migrants come up against a president who insists he is putting America first. Donald Trump says the 10,000 caravan members camped out in Tijuana endanger US lives and jobs. He's made it harder for them to claim asylum legally, and he's still trying to build a great wall to keep them out. But the American dream has a powerful pull.
For me, the American dream is to live there, to work there, to support my family and to live peacefully, which I couldn't do in my own country.
Last month, a handful of migrants breached the border. Many more were driven back by US tear gas. The crossing was shut down on one of the busiest shopping days of the year, costing $5 million for businesses on the frontier.
I think the people who live along the border understand the border very well. They understand how dynamic it is, how it's a shared economy. Maybe for some people in other parts of the United States, they don't really understand that. A lot of cars are manufactured there and come over here. It's just not possible to just draw a line and say we're going to close that.
Rachel is the baby of the migrant caravan. She joined it at 19 days old. Her entire family was caught up in the chaos at the border.
We went to the border and they threw gases at us and also at my little girl. So after that, we decided to stay in Mexico and just look for a job.
So far, they've traveled as far as the Atlantic Ocean is wide, but they're no closer to knowing their fate. James Cook, BBC News, Tijuana, in northern Mexico.
Beauty is big business in South Korea, where plastic surgery rates are amongst the highest in the world. But change could be on the way. More and more young women have begun to reject the high standards set by their culture. Laura Bicker reports now from Seoul on a movement known as Escape the Corset.
Getting the right job requires the right look in South Korea. Kim Joo-hui, like thousands of other graduates, is paying for a professional photo shoot for her job applications.
The people who hire me don't know who I am. They have to judge me based on how I look on the photo. So I wanted to give them the best version of myself to make a good impression on them.
Women are expected to look a certain way, especially those who seek success.
It's okay that your head is slightly tilted, but your facial expression is the most important.
These pictures go to boardrooms across Seoul, still dominated by men with the power to hire or fire. But some have decided to battle against the idea of what it means to be beautiful in South Korea, in a feminist movement which has grown on social media. Lena Bay, who once gave makeup tutorials, decided she'd had enough of the 12-step K-beauty routine.
I think lots of Korean women are wearing an appearance corset.
they also have this immense fear of what is shown to others. I heard women feel especially shameful when they hear they are ugly. I was like that as well.
But this movement has faced a backlash. Feminists protesting for equality were accused of being man-haters. Lena Bay faced personal attacks on her YouTube video.
There were even death threats saying that they will come find me and kill me. After I received that death threat, I was afraid of leaving the house.
Even the smallest of changes can prompt the loudest outcry. Presenter Yim Hyun-ju has made what in South Korea is a bold decision. She became the first female news anchor to wear her glasses on air.
I asked myself, is it really wrong to wear glasses? If it's a lighting problem, the male anchor shouldn't wear glasses as well. But they do it without thinking. So why haven't female anchors worn glasses? But I think these glasses brought a lot of change in me. I became more free. I think these glasses gave me wings called freedom.
They may be small in number for now, but it's rare to see and hear such voices in this once conformist society. Some hope the movement can now be used to make real progress on other pressing gender equality issues in South Korea. Laura Bicker, BBC News, Seoul.
Now, how do you give fossils a future? Well, you put them online, and that's exactly what London's Natural History Museum and Washington's Smithsonian Institution in the US have set out to do. They're digitally recording millions of fossils in their collections, many of which have been hidden away in drawers for decades. Our science correspondent Victoria Gill has the story.
So we're in our brachiopod collection.
Tucked into thousands of drawers, the entire history of life on Earth.
There's dozens of things in every box, in every... Wow.
Yes. There are 40 million fossils stored here at the Smithsonian Museum, and the team is carrying out the mammoth task of digitally recording every single one.
We have drawers here in the collection that haven't been opened in decades. The data held within museum drawers is trapped, and we are bringing that trapped data out into the light. We're mobilizing it for research.
Photographing and logging the details of each specimen in this collection alone will take an estimated 50 years. But it's part of an effort by institutions around the world to create a global digital museum where every piece of the fossil record can be studied online. The devastating fire at Brazil's National Museum this year destroyed knowledge that was amassed over 2 centuries and was a stark reminder of the need to protect and log such scientifically valuable collections.
This goes way beyond ensuring this huge collection. It means that this Triceratops skull, for example, could be in dozens of places at once, anywhere in the world, for any scientist to study.
And with a very detailed digital scan and a 3D printer, researchers here at Bristol University have been able to bring these dinosaurs into their lab.
This model is great because it allows us to kind of look in detail at the anatomy, and you'll pick it up and hold it and turn it around.
Amazing.
And now we can actually test ideas about how these animals actually functioned.
The digital skulls can be given virtual stress tests to work out what the animals ate, how they moved, and so what their environment was like 150 million years ago. Museums have gathered vast amounts of evidence of hundreds of millions of years of evolution. Now the challenge is to make sure it's shared and studied, not hidden away in the dark. Victoria Gill, BBC News in Washington, DC.
Now let's just show you the latest pictures we have from the Argentine capital, Buenos Aires. Thousands of River Plate football fans have brought the city centre to a virtual standstill. You can see so many people there as they celebrate their team winning the Copa Libertadores, the biggest contest in South American football. The game was actually played more than 10,000 kilometres away in Spain, where they beat their Argentine rivals Boca Juniors 3-1 in extra time. Now, the match was actually played in the Bernabeu Stadium in Madrid because it was postponed last month when Boca's team bus was attacked by River fans in Buenos Aires. They're obviously thrilled at the win there. Let's just remind you of our top story before we go. A Chinese technology executive whose detention in Canada has hit share prices around the world has requested bail, saying she's innocent of the charges against her. Do stay with us here on BBC World News. Much more coming up.
Hello. Well, Monday's looking pretty quiet for most of us on the weather front, and in fact, if you're wondering about the week ahead, it's not looking bad at all. It is going to turn progressively colder through the week, but nothing dramatic happening on the weather front. So let's see what's happening then on Monday. For many of us, it's actually going to start off fairly bright, if not sunny. A touch of frost is on the way, certainly for Scotland and northern parts of England. So here's the forecast then. Through the early hours of Monday morning, chilly northwesterly winds blowing in. Not much cloud out there, just a couple of showers maybe here and there. Here's that frost again across Scotland and northern England, down into Yorkshire as well, around -1, 2 degrees. But to the south of that, it's closer to +5 for Cardiff and for London. So it starts off bright, if not sunny. Sunny particularly in the east, but very quickly, this cloud you can see out west will be brought in by an increasing southwesterly breeze, so it will end up pretty cloudy, if not grey, across many of these western areas. The mildest spot will be Plymouth, 12 degrees, pretty balmy here compared to Newcastle, only around 5 degrees Celsius. Then on Tuesday, slightly less cold air, even quite mild air heads our way. You can see this southwesterly wind and the sort of a tongue of warmth all the way up into the north. With that also a couple of weather fronts, one here which is actually not going to bring us much rain, even though you can see rain here. This is another weather front here which is basically just a fair bit of cloud. So Tuesday across much of Scotland, England and Wales, probably staying fairly cloudy with some sunshine poking through. Here's the other weather front. It's not making much progress, so it'll stay to the west of us, I think. So Belfast should be dry on Tuesday. And 12 degrees here, 12 for Plymouth as well. Then on Wednesday, we start to see a little bit of a change. The winds die down, and in fact, we start to develop an ever so slightly more easterly wind. That also means that the temperatures will start to dip. So I think for most of us, it's down to single figures, 6s and 7s, that sort of thing, maybe just about scraping a 10 there in Plymouth. Now, the bigger picture shows where the colder air is coming from on Thursday, in fact, all the way from Russia, across the Baltic, southern Scandinavia, the North Sea. You can see that colder air ends up right across the UK. Not desperately cold, but you will feel those temperatures dipping away as we go through the week. In fact, let's take a look at London then. You can see on Monday it's 10 degrees, by Wednesday it's 8. And on Thursday and Friday around 5 or 6 degrees, and at times pretty cloudy too, so it will feel cold. Bye-bye.
Follow the story, whatever you're doing, wherever you are. You can follow every moment in depth with BBC News. Get the full story at bbc.co.uk/news. Get the headlines as they happen with the breaking news alert. And keep up with events by watching the BBC News channel in the app. Follow the story wherever you are with BBC News.
This is weird, isn't it?
No, still weird. But if there's a report about where I live or what I do...
It usually sounds like this.
Or it might be this.
Or maybe even this.
Or sometimes this.
The BBC Young Reporter competition, what's changed that?
If you're aged between 11 and 18 and have a story you think needs telling, the BBC can help you tell it. Find your voice and enter now at bbc.co.uk/Young Reporter competition.
This is BBC News, the headlines. A Chinese technology executive whose detention in Canada has caused protests from Beijing has requested bail. The chief financial officer of Huawei, Meng Wanzhou, was arrested at the request of the United States, which has accused her of fraud in violating American sanctions on Iran. Britain's Prime Minister Theresa May has spoken to her counterpart and the President of the European Council ahead of a planned parliamentary vote on her government's Brexit deal. Many MPs from party have called for a delay, but she insists the vote will take place on Tuesday. 26-year-old man has been remanded in custody in New Zealand, charged with murdering a British backpacker. Grace Mullane, who was 22, went missing more than a week ago. Yesterday, police found a body they believe to be hers in woods on the outskirts of the city of Auckland. It's 2:30 in the morning. Now on BBC News, the week in Parliament.
Hello there and welcome to the Week in Parliament. With the crucial vote on her EU withdrawal deal looming, Theresa May appeals to MPs to support her plan.
I ask you to back it in the best interests of our constituents and our country. And with my whole heart, I commend this motion to the House.
But Labour's clear it won't accept the deal.
The Prime Minister has seen these negotiations only as an exercise in the internal management of the Conservative Party.
Also on this programme, Jeremy Corbyn and Theresa May clash over the state of the welfare state. And peers reckon the public will be angry if they don't get a vote on Theresa May's Brexit deal.
Why did you deny me the chance to become familiar with those facts and then express my opinion again? Why did you take that from me and deny it to me?
But first, it was another week of drama at Westminster.
The ayes to the right, 307. The noes to the left, 311.
A week of dismay for ministers.
The ayes to the right, 311. The noes to the left, 293.
And a week of defeat for the government.
The ayes to the right, 321. The noes to the left, 299. So the ayes have it. The ayes have it.
On Tuesday, in the space of just over an hour, Theresa May suffered 3 defeats in the Commons. The first 2 came as MPs debated, then agreed a Labour move, accusing ministers of being in contempt or frustrating Parliament by failing to publish in full the legal opinion on the Brexit deal. An SNP MP made clear why the opposition wouldn't be placated by the version the government had given them instead.
They are placing themselves above Parliament. They are placing themselves in contempt of Parliament. And as for the legal position document published yesterday that was going to fix it all, that could hardly have been more patronising if they'd had pictures to colour in and rejoin the dots puzzles every so often just to keep us interested.
And then, just moments before Theresa May was to speak, came that third defeat, as a cross-party group of MPs, spearheaded by the Conservative former Attorney-General Dominic Grieve, succeeded in giving the Commons the right to say what should happen next if her Brexit deal is voted down on Tuesday.
It is contrary to all sensible practice, and I have to say, slightly disrespectful of the role of this House, that we should end up with a situation in which we have unamendable motions for consideration at a time when the Parliament ought to be fully focused on trying to find means of resolving outstanding issues.
And he had support from the Labour MP who chairs the Brexit Committee.
It is essential that the House of Commons has the opportunity, if the deal is voted down next Tuesday, to give itself a voice to express a view about what happens next. And what the Right Honourable and Learned Gentleman's amendment does, as we've just heard, is to remove the obstacle to that, and I hope the whole of the House will vote for it.
And sure enough, the government was defeated by 22 votes, the third defeat for the government in just one day. It all made for an uncomfortable backdrop for the Prime Minister, who less than a minute later got up to make one of the most crucial speeches of her career, as she tried to persuade MPs to back her deal in the vote on Tuesday.
To all sides of the debate, to every member in every party, I say that this deal deserves your support for what it achieves for all of our people and our whole United Kingdom. One union of 4 nations, now and in the future. And this is a debate about our future. It's not about whether we could have taken a different road in the past, but which road we should take from here. If we put aside our differences and remember what unites us, if we broker an honourable compromise in the interest not of ourselves, but of those we were sent here to serve, if we come together and do our duty to our constituents, then we will pass the test that history has set for us today. It's not easy when the passions run so deep, but looking around this chamber, I know we can meet this moment. So I promise you today, this is the very best deal for the British people. I ask you to back it in the best interests of our constituents and our country. And with my whole heart, I commend this motion to the House.
The Prime Minister has seen these negotiations only as an exercise in the internal management of the Conservative Party, and that did not work out very well at all. When the two previous Brexit secretaries, who theoretically at least led the negotiations, well, they did theoretically, say they cannot support the deal, how can she expect anyone else in this House or in this country to have faith in a deal that's been rejected by two of the people that were involved in the negotiation of it?
Throughout the entire negotiating period, the UK government has treated Scotland with contempt. Scotland voted overwhelmingly to remain, yet the will of the Scottish people means nothing. Yes. Absolutely nothing to this Prime Minister. Instead of engaging meaningfully with Scotland during this critical time, the Prime Minister chose last-minute photocalls and stage-managed events in Scotland, all smoke and mirrors, to dress up the fact that her government couldn't care less about Scotland, and we can see it tonight.
To enter into this arrangement that has been put forward, first through the transition period as proposed and then the backstop provisions, means we enter a twilight world where the EU is given unprecedented powers over the UK, certainly in the transition period, and massive leverage in the negotiations on the future trade relationship. And we would have to rely on the goodwill of others to let us ever leave these arrangements. So under these terms, in my view, the UK's future as a strong and independent global trading nation standing together is in real and imminent jeopardy.
The brutal truth is that the country is bitterly divided. And it will be bitterly divided if we leave under the terms that the government has negotiated. We will be entering into a set of conditions in which the economy will deteriorate relative to what it would have been in the European Union. A younger generation are coming through who will bear the brunt of the costs, most of whom voted to remain in the European Union. An estimated 80% of 18-year-olds wishes to remain. There will be great bitterness and resentment about what the older generation has imposed on them. This issue will not go away.
And when the debate went over to the backbenches, the divisions within parties and across the Commons became all too clear.
I really can't believe that there is a single member of this House who sincerely believes that this deal we have before us is a good deal for the UK.
I sincerely believe it. I've got no stake in this government anymore, but I still think it's the right thing to do.
The Right Honourable Member was a senior member of Vote Leave. He was Foreign Secretary for 2 years. We are in this mess because of him. Does he take no responsibility?
The fact is that I'm afraid I was not able to continue to support this process for precisely that reason.
The deal on offer. As the Prime Minister says, the only deal on offer does not recover our sovereignty. It leaves us rule takers from the European Union without any voice in shaping those rules.
The former Universities Minister spoke for the first time since his resignation.
Because voting for this withdrawal agreement, giving the public the impression that this is the best compromise and there are no problems further down the line, this is Brexit done. When they wake up and see that Britain is being hobbled and crippled in those negotiations, that would also disappoint voters, and that would also be corrosive of our politics.
Theresa May did have backing from some. One Conservative praised her courage and dogged pursuit of a deal.
I'm sure that there are many right honourable and honourable members on both sides of this House who remember Lewis Carroll's wonderful poem, The Hunting of the Snark, which includes the following lines, which I believe are appropriate. The principal failing occurred in the sailing, and the bellman, perplexed and distressed, said he had hoped at least, when the wind blew due east, that the ship would not travel due west. Mr. Speaker, to coin a phrase from a greater, kinder and more resolute period in our national life. Come, let us go forward together and settle this now.
The Lords also began a debate on the EU withdrawal deal and our proposed future relationship with the EU. One of the early speakers was the Archbishop of Canterbury, who warned that the UK could drift into no deal.
There is a significant danger of adverse economic effect, with a fall in government revenue, rise in unemployment and greater poverty. Some will argue that is only going to be temporary, but we need to remember that for those in poverty, temporary is an eternity.
No deal is completely unacceptable. The May deal is completely unacceptable. And when people turn around and say, look, the British Party are weary of Brexit, they just want it over, that might be true for this minute. But I tell you, when they face the consequences of Brexit and see the impact on their lives, that will be forgotten in a flash. And there will be huge anger. And they will turn to people in this House and the other and say, when the facts were on the table, why did you deny me the chance to become familiar with those facts and then express my opinion again? Why did you take that from me and deny it to me?
I am concerned as to what might happen if we have a second referendum. What could the result be? If the result were to be 52-48 Remain, would the Leavers be content? If the result is the same as last time, on what grounds are we remaining? This deal or another deal? And if we've got 3 questions on the ballot paper, what happens if all are rejected?
Lady Taylor. So the big vote is due on Tuesday night at 7 p.m. Earlier I spoke to Sir David Beamish, a former clerk of the Parliament, one of Parliament's top experts on procedure. I began by asking him about the significance of that Dominic Grieve amendment, the third of those defeats suffered by Theresa May, which gives MPs more say if the EU withdrawal deal is voted down on Tuesday.
This allows amendments to be tabled, which means that the members of the House of Commons will have the opportunity to put alternative proposals and have them voted on, which would not have been the case without that amendment to the business motion.
So this really could be an example of Parliament taking back control to some extent?
I would say so, yes. I think you've got to be careful about the word control. Obviously, Parliament can't be, so to speak, in the driving seat holding the steering wheel, but it can be holding the government to account, and it will be much better able to do that with the Dominic Grieve amendment having been agreed to.
Now, there's been endless chatter about how the numbers are going to stack up and whether the government might win or whether it will lose. Do you think that the government might decide to go down the line of actually pulling the vote altogether on Tuesday?
Well, I've seen discussion of that, but it seems to be formally quite difficult to do. The debate has begun. They'd have to have some alternative plan to put forward for not going ahead with it, and I can't myself see what that might look like.
All right, so assuming that the vote goes ahead on Tuesday, if you're tuning in at 7 o'clock on Tuesday night, how are you going to know what's going on? Let's start by talking about the amendments. Who decides which amendments are voted on?
Mr. Speaker can select those amendments which will be voted on. It won't happen until the last day. There are at least half a dozen amendments have been tabled, one by Mr. Corbyn, another by Hilary Benn, who chairs the Select Committee on exiting the European Union. I imagine both of those would be selected. Just to make life more confusing for those viewing, the amendments are taken before the main motion, so the House first decides whether it wants to amend the motion and then votes on the main motion, either amended or unamended.
And there will be several votes, and if you're watching these votes, what should you be looking out for to give you a clue of what's going on?
Again, it's quite hard for the outsider. At the end, the tellers on each side appoint 2 members to count the votes. One counts their own votes and the other goes into the other lobby to count the opposing votes. So there's one from each side in each lobby. And they come back in and one of the tellers for the winning side reads out the numbers. So if you recognise the people concerned, you can get a clue, and obviously the members can when one of the teller steps forward to read out the score.
And there'll be lots of cheering and waving of order papers in the few seconds before we get the actual numbers too.
Indeed.
Now, if Theresa May loses, there are lots of different options of what could happen next. Are there parliamentary constraints on what she can do after that vote result?
Obviously, the immediate parliamentary constraint is that she has to present within 21 days a statement of what the government are going to do next in relation to EU withdrawal. But politically, yes, all sorts of things could happen. I think the Labour opposition have talked about tabling a motion of no confidence in the government, and traditionally time should be found for such a motion to be debated. In terms of options from the government side, it's hard to see what else they could do, unless she wants to dissolve Parliament herself, but that might be tricky given that the reason she'd lost would have been that not all the members of her own party were aligned with her own point of view. So she's probably not got that many options.
OK, now we've been talking about the Commons, and all eyes really have been on the Commons in the last few days. But there has been a parallel debate going on in the House of Lords. Now, it's slightly different. It's not as significant for the government, depending on how the Lords votes. But do you think Theresa May really does need to pay attention to what's been going on in the Lords?
Yes, she does need to pay attention more, because in the whole Brexit process there's been quite a significant role for the Lords, and indeed in opening the three-day debate the leader of the House of Lords recalled how there have been 68 committee reports since the referendum on elements of Brexit, and many hours spent debating and indeed amending the EU withdrawal bill. The Lords has been very involved in all this, but I think everybody in the Lords accepts that the meaningful vote itself is a matter for the elected House.
Sir David Beamish. And if you do want someone to explain exactly what's going on while those votes are being held, do tune in to BBC Parliament on Tuesday. There'll be full coverage of the proceedings in the Commons, plus live analysis of any and every vote from our parliamentary correspondent Mark Darcy. Now let's take a look at some other news from around Westminster in brief. At Prime Minister's Questions, the Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn used his 6 questions not to ask Theresa May about the defeats inflicted on her government by MPs on Tuesday, or about the impending Brexit vote. Instead, he raised changes to the welfare system.
Child poverty is rising, homelessness rising, destitution rising, household debt rising. When will the Prime Minister turn her warm words into action, end the benefit freeze, repeal the bedroom tax, scrap the 2-child cap and halt the rollout of universal credit?
What do we see under this government? Our economy is growing, employment is rising, investment is up. We're giving the NHS the biggest single cash boost in its history. Taxes are being cut. Wages are rising. Labour would destroy all that. It's this Conservative government that's building a brighter future for our country.
The former Foreign Secretary Boris Johnson has made a full and unreserved apology to MPs for failing to declare more than £52,000 in income. He was ordered to apologise by the Committee on Standards over his late declaration of book royalty payments.
I fully accept that the delay was a breach of the House's rules, and though I am grateful to the committee for recognising that there was no intention to mislead the House and that I have been completely transparent, I therefore offer the House a full and unreserved apology.
Labour peers have joined MPs in calling on the Transport Secretary Chris Grayling to take a share of the blame for the timetable chaos suffered by rail travellers earlier this year. The Transport Committee said Mr Grayling should have done more to prevent the problems. One peer spotted another omission.
Some of the railway companies appear to have removed the word cancellation from their vocabulary. So you arrive at the station for a train, look at the board and discover it is no more. It never existed. It is not there.
An MP called for tighter regulation of shisha lounges. The venues provide pipes known as hookahs, where tobacco is mixed with other flavours, burnt and passed through water before being inhaled. It's estimated that an evening spent smoking shisha is equivalent to 100 cigarettes. The MP behind the debate said local communities could face noise, antisocial behaviour and crime. The Scottish Parliament and Welsh Assembly both gave their verdicts on Theresa May's Brexit deal in the week. Let's hear first from Holyrood and BBC Scotland's political editor, Brian Taylor.
Firstly, let's start with Scotland's potentially direct impact upon Brexit. You'll know that Article 50 was the mechanism whereby the United Kingdom signalled her determination to leave the European Union. It was the process of Brexit. The question arises whether the UK alone can reverse the implementation of Article 50 or whether that would require the consent of all the other European Union countries. A group of Scottish politicians led by the Green MSP Andy Whiteman decided to put that to the test with, of course, significant legal backing. The case started in the Scottish courts. It's now wound its way tortuously to the European Court of Justice, who are due to give their ruling on this question on Monday, the day before the meaningful vote in the Commons. But an Advocate General for the ECJ has already said that yes, Article 50 can be reversed unilaterally by the UK, and that's expected to be the outcome on Monday. Does it matter? The Prime Minister already said she's no intention of reversing Article 50. It's hypothetical, but of course she may not be entirely in charge of events, and perhaps at the very least it clarifies the potential outcome whether to be a second further referendum on Brexit, which was a topic raised in this very Parliament, this very Scottish Parliament this week, when MSPs were debating the Brexit deal advanced by the Prime Minister. The Liberal Democrats substantially advocating a second vote. The SNP are in favour of that as well, although their ultimate aim, of course, is to reverse it entirely and for Scotland and the UK to remain in the European Union. But Labour tended to prefer a general election, bringing down the Conservative government. So no obvious common ground for those parties who oppose the Conservatives as to the way they want to go, but they are certainly opposed to the Conservative deal and opposed to any concept of Britain leaving without a deal. That was the outcome of the vote here by 92 votes to 29, with only the Conservatives standing out, all the other parties grouping together. I was most struck in the debate, by a little throwaway line from Adam Tompkins, who's the Constitutional Affairs spokesperson for the Conservatives. He said the only deal that was seriously able to be contemplated was the Prime Minister's deal or something very close to it, which suggested to me, to this observer, that the Tories are very definitely looking for ways to tweak their approach to this, perhaps the idea of giving the Commons a greater role in the question of the backstop, looking at for anything, some nuance that might persuade their decidedly reluctant backbenchers to get on board.
And there was further bad news for the Prime Minister from the debate in the Senedd. At Cardiff Bay, here's BBC Cymru's Brexit correspondent James Williams.
Ahead of the debate here in the Welsh Assembly on Theresa May's Brexit deal, the Welsh Conservatives had called the symbolic discussion a pantomime. But by the end of play, it had turned into a bit of a farce for the Welsh Government. For months, the Welsh First Minister Carwyn Jones had said that it was important for the Assembly to send a clear statement of its position ahead of the meaningful vote in the House of Commons. So it came as a bit of a surprise when the Welsh Government tabled a motion that did not explicitly reject or accept Theresa May's Brexit deal, much to the annoyance of Plaid Cymru and the pro-EU campaign group Wales for Europe. So as well as discussing the substantive details of the UK-EU agreement, there was also discussion as to how the Welsh Government tabled such a dog's breakfast of a motion. I'm told it was a clear motion when first drafted, then it became less clear after a special meeting of the Welsh Government's Cabinet, and then less clear again after the Welsh Labour group got its hands on the motion. So, in a tacit admission that it had messed things up in terms of this debate, the Welsh Labour group and the Welsh Government ended up backing the Plaid Cymru amendment to the debate that called on the UK Government to continue with membership of the EU's single market and customs union, called for an extension of the Article 50 negotiating process, and by 36 votes to 14, the Welsh Assembly explicitly rejected Theresa May's Brexit deal.
Staying with the Senedd, Mark Drakeford has been named as the new leader of Welsh Labour and is now set to become the next First Minister of Wales. Mr Drakeford, who's currently Finance Secretary, won the leadership election to succeed Carwyn Jones. Time now for a look at some of the other stories making the political news this week. Here's Selina Seth with our countdown.
At 5, Conservative MP John Howell told MPs that at one dinner party he went to, if guests mentioned the word Brexit, they had to drink neat rum as punishment.
While I would love that to be the case here, I suspect that is not going to occur.
4, Labour peer Martha Osmore, mother of MP Kate, joins the Lords, bringing the grand total in the upper house to 793 and counting. At 3, if you were worrying about how to do the perfect flounce, just watch the leader of the House of Commons, Andrea Leadsom, as she knows exactly what to do.
Okay, you ready? Something like that.
At 2, retail mogul Mike Ashley reassures the committee that he is in fact a mere mortal.
And before anybody says it, I'm not